Okay, so imagine this for a second, right? You decide, you're going to speak out against the government, maybe write an article or go to a protest or something. And then next thing you know, boom, you're diagnosed with, get this, sluggishly progressing schizophrenia.
Oh, wow.
Yes, sounds crazy, right? Like straight out of a dystopian novel.
Yeah.
But this was a real thing in the Soviet Union. They used psychiatry as a weapon, basically calling it punitive psychiatry, to silence anyone they saw as a threat. It's a pretty dark chapter in history. And you actually gave us an interview with a Bulgarian psychiatrist, Dr. Petar Marinov, who saw all this firsthand.
Oh.
And yeah, his perspective is really eye-opening. It really makes you think.
Yeah, you're right. That kind of control is terrifying. And I think to really understand how it worked, we need to think back to what life was like in the Soviet Union, especially, under Stalin. Back then, any kind of dissent, any little voice that spoke out against the government was met with immediate and brutal repression.
Right. So they really took control, huh?
Oh, absolutely.
So it was really like they weaponized psychiatry.
Yeah, exactly.
Oh.
They took something that was meant to heal, to help people, and twisted it into a tool for control. It's really disturbing when you think about it.
For sure.
And you can really see the impact of this on individuals. I mean, think about Valeria Novodvorskaya, the journalist whose photos we saw in the research before and after her time in a Soviet psych ward. The transformation is just unbelievable.
Yeah, it's chilling.
She goes from this vibrant, energetic woman to, well, someone who looks completely defeated.
Yeah.
And it really highlights the insidious nature of what they were doing.
Mm-hmm.
This wasn't just about controlling people's behavior on the surface. They were trying to break their spirits.
Yeah, it's one thing to think about the government doing that, but to think that doctors went along with it?
I know, it's hard to fathom.
Yeah.
I mean, how could anyone trained to care for people be a part of something so awful?
Right.
Well, some were probably true believers in the Soviet ideology, but I think many others were just trapped in an impossible system. If they spoke out, they risked their careers, their freedom, maybe even their lives,
That's true. It's heavy stuff. But it's interesting because Bulgaria was part of the Soviet bloc, but they really seemed to make an effort to distance themselves from all this. It's kind of like they were walking this tightrope,
Yeah, absolutely. They were in a really tough spot. On the one hand, they were under immense pressure to go along with Soviet practices.
Yeah.
But it seems like, on the other, they were trying to hold on to some kind of ethical integrity.
Yeah.
So it's this really complex situation where political pressure clashed with their conscience,
Absolutely.
It's really fascinating.
And when they withdrew from the World Psychiatric Association, that was a huge statement, right? Like they were calling out the Soviet Union on a global stage.
Oh, absolutely. It was a direct challenge to Soviet authority.
Yeah.
They refused to be complicit in this manipulation of medicine.
Right.
Although, when you look at their later actions, it does make you wonder, look, remember, after the Soviet Union got kicked out of the association, Bulgaria actually asked to be excluded, too.
Yeah.
It's interesting, right?
It does make you wonder if they were truly trying to do the right thing or if they were just trying to align themselves with the West.
Yeah, exactly. Maybe it was a strategic move,
Yeah.
kind of a way to separate themselves from the Soviets without a direct confrontation.
Yeah, totally. It really gives you a peek into how complicated international relations were during the Cold War. But beyond all the political maneuvering and the historical context, I keep coming back to the human side of all this. That's why I'm so interested to dig deeper into this interview with Dr. Marinov. He lived through it all. He saw it all. It's kind of like, when Dr. Marinov said, and this really stuck with me, he said, the socialist camp, it was almost impossible not to catch something from that disregard for people.
Right.
It's just like, wow.
It really gets to you.
Yeah.
And I think it speaks to how insidious these systems can be.
Yeah.
It's like this gradual desensitization, a creeping acceptance of cruelty.
Yeah.
And it seeps into everything, every part of life.
Right.
And the thing is, it wasn't just those who were actively participating in the system.
Right.
Even those who opposed it, who saw the horrors firsthand, they were still shaped by that environment,
Yeah, absolutely. It's like this oppressive weight,
Yeah.
just hanging over everything, making it hard to even think straight, let alone fight back.
Exactly. And that's what makes Dr. Marinov's perspective so important.
Right.
He wasn't just watching this happen from a distance. He was living it. He was right there working within that system.
Right.
Training under these key figures involved in punitive psychiatry, seeing how this manipulation played out.
Yeah, he was really in the thick of it, trying to be a good doctor, uphold his oath, but stuck in this system that was just inherently wrong.
Exactly. And I imagine that was a struggle for a lot of doctors.
Yeah.
Do you comply, become complicit in something you know is wrong, or do you resist and risk losing everything? I mean, it's an impossible choice. Even just hearing Dr. Marinov talk about his professor's encounter with Snezhnevsky.
Oh, yeah.
That really got to me.
That was intense.
Snezhnevsky, the architect of it all, right? It just gives you this glimpse into the tension that must have been there. This renowned Bulgarian psychiatrist who probably had serious reservations about what Snezhnevsky was doing.
Right.
But he had to interact with this guy, this powerful, influential figure. You could practically feel the weight of that encounter,
Yeah.
The things left unsaid, the fear, the defiance.
Yeah, for sure. It's easy to get caught up in the big historical picture, the Cold War and all that.
Right.
But then you hear these stories,
Yeah.
and you remember that history is made up of people's lives, real people, making choices, dealing with the consequences. And sometimes those consequences...
Yeah, some of them are just awful.
They're horrifying. I mean, like that thing Dr. Marinov said about the Russian textbook, the one that just casually mentions Georgy Markov's assassination.
Oh, yeah, I know exactly what you mean.
Like it just sends chills down your spine,
Chilling is right.
This guy gets assassinated with a poison-tipped umbrella.
I know.
And it's just a footnote.
It's just a footnote. Like, it's no big deal.
It's unbelievable.
That says so much about the mindset back then.
Totally.
Violence, even something as brutal as murder, it was just another tool for them. A means to an end and nothing more.
Exactly. And the fact that they would put that in a textbook, like so casually, it shows a total disregard for human life. It's scary.
It is scary. And it makes you think, because the pursuit of knowledge, the advancement of science, I mean, those things can't be separated from ethics.
Right, exactly.
They're intertwined.
Yeah.
And that leads to a really important question, one that we're still grappling with today, long after the Cold War is over.
Which is?
How do we make sure science, especially medicine, is used for good? That it's used to heal, to help people, not to control them.
It feels like such a big question,
It is.
How do we stop this from ever happening again? How do we make sure that science and medicine are never used like this again?
Well, for one thing, I think it requires us to be really, really careful. We can't let our guard down,
Right.
We need strong ethical guidelines for any kind of research, total transparency in medicine. But honestly, maybe even more important than that is the culture, right?
What do you mean?
We need a culture that actually encourages people to speak up when they see something wrong.
Right, because if everyone's too afraid to say anything, then nothing's going to change.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Silence only helps the people in power, the ones who want to exploit the system.
Yeah.
It takes guts to stand up and say, hey, this isn't right, especially when your career is on the line.
Yeah.
Or your reputation.
Yeah.
And it goes beyond individual bravery, too. We have to build systems where speaking out isn't seen as a threat, where it's actually valued.
Right, like it's a good thing.
Exactly, because it is a good thing. It shows a healthy system when people can speak their minds.
Yeah. Despite everything that happened, Dr. Marinov seems really hopeful about the future.
Oh, yeah.
He talked a lot about Bulgaria joining the EU and, how he believes in this younger generation to keep pushing for progress.
I like that, passing the torch.
Yeah. And it made me think, even in those really oppressive systems, there must have been people who resisted.
Right.
Like, even if it was subtle or hidden.
Oh, I'm sure there were. Dr. Marinov actually mentioned that, come to think of it. Even in the Soviet Union.
Oh, really?
He said there were people who saw how wrong this was, this whole punitive psychiatry thing, and they worked to fight against it.
Wow.
Quietly, of course. They couldn't be obvious about it.
It kind of gives you hope, right?
It does.
Like, even when it seems like everything is awful, there are still good people trying to do the right thing. It's inspiring in a way. Makes you realize that one person can make a difference.
Totally.
Well, on that note, that feels like a good place to wrap up, right? It's a lot to think about.
It is.
The history of all this, how easily power can be abused, but also, the resilience of the human spirit.
And the importance of speaking out.
Exactly. All right. Well, until next time.